Hello, welcome to White Space from Data Center Dynamics in our second week without Bill. This week, Bill, I think, has moved on. By the time you watch this, he'll be in California visiting startups in the software-defined field. So if you're watching this, Bill, give him hell. Right, and what have we been doing without him? Well, obviously, we've been having fun. I've been out to Slough.
Yes. The data center capital of the UK.
If not the world, well, the UK. Yes, and this time I've been to see IO, the service provider that uses modules made by its sibling company, Baselayer, and has just opened a 10,000 square meter data center, which if you're watching in Imperial is 100,000 square feet or thereabouts. Up to 20 megawatts of power, a new big data center in Slough. Very exciting.
Yes.
Well, substantially quite exciting because it uses modules, it's at present a big empty shed. And you step into it, having gone past where you see the security, which everybody always shows you, and the power and cooling units, into a big shed. In one corner, there are some modules which are on show. You can see where you might put your IT kit. In another corner, there's the anchor tenant, Goldman Sachs, which has a long-term deal with IO, so they're there as the first tenant here in Slough and also in Singapore and New Jersey.
But I thought it's very secretive in banking. Like if you take up space in a colocation facility, you don't tell anyone about it, and you sort of like you might even get a cage around it so nobody could see inside.
Well, they didn't let us look at the Goldman Sachs data centers. The modules, it's kind of a sealed off bit of the thing. And there was a guy, it actually had a security guard standing there in high-vis jacket inside the shed in front of the modules. We could see that there was slightly, the only thing we could see was it's slightly different. The modules that IO uses are raised up on a raised floor, which for modular data center fans is a bit odd and unexpected. You think modules ought to stand on the concrete, but these ones don't, or not the way IO has implemented them. Mm-hmm. Goldman Sachs has them, they're lower slung because Goldman Sachs is using a different cooling system. So they've obviously done something to cook it slightly differently for Goldman Sachs, but they weren't talking in great detail about it. And as you say, they were very secretive. We were only allowed to use the word Goldman Sachs for about halfway through the event when they approved it.
And then how are they powering it? Because 20 megawatts is a huge amount of power.
Slough has power coming out of its ears. There are local base stations that provide this, and it's standard grid power coming through fairly standard power distribution units.
No green credentials, no renewables, no nothing.
Nothing particularly there, no. And the cooling wasn't particularly free air cooling. It's using chilled water that circulates under the data center. One of the other visitors there sort of scratched his head and said, "This looks just exactly like Infinity," which is an interesting observation. And someone else said that the most exciting thing, or the thing that IO itself almost seemed to be most excited about, was the operating system. This is what comes with the Baselayer modules, and it's a pretty impressive bit of software. It's DSIM for modular data centers. It's called IO.OS, and it gives you the PUE, the temperature, the power draw, right down to the smallest component. All packaged up in quite a nice look and feel. Good. And so a nice trip out in Slough, and you're sorry to miss that, aren't you, Bill? Fancy going to San Francisco instead?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and what I found interesting this week is IBM has expressed complete support for Apache Spark, an open source project which sort of tries to do the same things as MapReduce but do them slightly differently. And
Hang on, MapReduce, so this means we're in the Hadoop world, yeah?
yes,
Okay.
yes. This is it's not quite a competitor, but it's a similar framework. And what I didn't know is IBM actually was there when Spark was born. It was a founding member of the AMP lab at UC Berkeley, where it was developed. And I think a year later they committed it to open source. And now they said they're gonna get Spark into all of their products, including Watson, and I'm gonna come back to that. They're gonna put 3,500 researchers to work on Spark-related projects, and they're going to teach 1 million developers how to work with Spark. So that's pretty big. Besides, they're also giving away their machine learning algorithms to the open source community, and offering Spark in the cloud on the Bluemix developer service. So a lot of support for Spark. And Watson is really interesting because they're saying they're going to use it in the Watson Health Cloud, announced recently. And this is a thing which is going to draw all of the medical information together. You're going to ask it a question, and it's going to tell you what's wrong with you. So IBM becoming a little bit more developer friendly, a little bit more open, and interestingly, they're also opening a Spark research center in San Francisco. So that's going to be sort of like the hub of their operations, I guess. So yeah. Great support. It's going to be interesting to see what impact that's going to have on the open source.
Okay, and meanwhile, I've been hearing about car batteries at the General Motors plant.
Isn't that a bit outside of our core interest, no?
Oh, well, we're interested in everything, but these are actually car batteries that are being used in a data center. It's not immediately obvious why you need them, though I suppose all data centers will have some sort of energy storage as part of the UPS. The interesting thing here is that energy storage is important because we're trying to make the grid more efficient and to use more renewable energy. So this General Motors plant in Milford already has wind turbines, 2 kilowatts of that, and 74 kilowatt solar array. So not a huge amount of power. I don't think it's a very big data center all told. But the trouble is sun and wind is a bit intermittent. You can't guarantee the power is always going to be there. So they don't on their own make a good way of powering a data center. In order to do that, you need to have some storage. And General Motors, and storage has been kind of expensive and inefficient and not very good. But General Motors' idea is that it's there are car batteries, second-hand car batteries in essence. We're not talking 12-volt batteries for diesel or petrol cars. We're talking electric car batteries, specifically in this case for the Chevy Volt. They've got a guaranteed lifespan in the car, 100,000 miles, 8 years, and at the end of that time they get replaced. However, they've still got plenty of life in them. If you've used any kind of rechargeable batteries, you know that as time goes by, they perform less well, but they still got some life in them, and they're good enough to use stationary in a data center. So General Motors has plugged in 5 of them, and that's enough, they say, to smooth out the ups and downs in the renewable energy supply and allow the data center to be effectively independent of the grid. They may be the only people actually doing it, but they're not the only people talking about it. Last year I met with Nissan and some European partners who have a European project aiming to do essentially the same thing with retired Nissan batteries. Credit Suisse Bank is involved, and Eaton Power, and the project's called Green DataNet from Europe. We saw, I've not heard anything about much of a practical demonstration yet from them. I've asked them about it. If you're watching Green DataNet people, let us know how you're getting on, because I think, I mean, overall, this is an important and interesting thing to be doing. There aren't that many used and retired electric car batteries out there now because the electric car market's only just starting. But in a few years' time, if things go as the analysts predict, there'll be an awful lot of them. So finally, Max, you've been looking at a mover and a shaker this week, haven't you?
Oh yeah, and what a mover he is. Stephen Elop, the now former executive vice president of Microsoft's Devices and Services division, is out. Stephen Elop has no job as of yesterday. Well, it was announced yesterday. But the story is very, very interesting. So Elop was a Microsoft exec for 2 years before he accepted a job as chief executive of Nokia. And he was the first non-Finnish CEO of the company in more than a century, I believe. And things started going rapidly downhill. I think Nokia lost about 40% of its revenue during Elop's tenure, and he was accused of being Trojan CEO because 2 years later, Nokia's device business was sold to Microsoft. And guess what? Stephen Elop became a Microsoft exec, received 18.8 million in his severance pay from Nokia. And generally, a lot of people think that was the initial plan. And some people have been running the headlines. What company is Stephen Elop going to steal from Microsoft next?
Nah.
You see, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think Microsoft is done with him and he's done with Microsoft, because the wording of the release and the things Nadella said, we agreed with Stephen that it's probably a good time for him to leave Microsoft. It sounded very final, and it sounded like Nadella, who didn't actually hire the man, probably doesn't want to have him around. But that's just my opinion.
That's right, because he was hired back by Steve Ballmer.
Yes.
When Steve Ballmer was in charge.
Yes.
And when Steve Ballmer was about to leave, there was even talk that he might be a possible replacement. He was. Some people tipped him for the CEO job, but I don't think anybody seriously thought about that. I mean, there's an alternative view to some extent of his time at Nokia. There are people with good things to say about it. I think it's fair to say that Nokia had problems anyway. That they had this huge dominance of smartphones when Symbian was the only smartphone platform out there before the iPhone arrived, and they never really recovered from the arrival of the iPhone. Never really got together an iPhone competitor, and then Android appeared, and so there wasn't even much space for a second player for them. And it's not fair to say that nobody liked Symbian, because people that liked Symbian absolutely loved it, but it wasn't hugely popular among the large market that smartphones had to get to. So it was something had to change anyway. Whether that meant getting out of smartphones completely, I don't know. Whether selling out to Microsoft was the best thing, who knows?
Yes, but apparently the telecom part of the business is growing, and Nokia is actually sort of like is in a great condition. And there's even rumors they might start making mobile phones again, which would be very, very interesting.
Right, but who would they get to lead that phone business if they got back into phones? I think there's one person we can rule out from the start. Okay, I think that's all from White Space this week. Have a good time in America, Bill, and we'll see you when you get back. And to all the rest of you, have a good week.
Goodbye.